Nowadays, people love to use words like serve or slay or mother, but there's only one person alive known to have served for slaying her mother, and that's Gypsy Rose Blanchard. So, recently released from prison, there's bound to be some ups and downs, and even some red flags, the topic of our video today. So, we'll be diving into those, starting with her husband. A lot of people have had a lot of different opinions about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Many people have had one opinion in common though, that being her husband has some horrendously bad vibes. So, how'd she meet the Mega Man? Well, one could argue she turned on Family Guy one day, saw Peter Griffin, and mail-order brided him into existence. In actuality, it's because Ryan Anderson and a co-worker both agreed to write prisoners they'd seen in documentaries. Ryan's co-worker chose to write to Joe Exotic, and Ryan chose to write to Gypsy Rose Blanchard because he thought she was cute. Ryan Anderson is a teacher, and past students of his reported that he showed photos of her to his class and claimed that she was a nurse. This feels like an attempt to showboat. Ryan was aware his students would recognize Gypsy because of the amount of media attention her case had gotten. Students of course recognized her, and once word got around, Ryan was asked to resign from his job. Which isn't a big deal now that conveniently, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, his wife, is reeling in the money through interviews, many of which he is now in. When he recounts his story to Gypsy's sister, Mia, about first finding out about her, she responds, "You were fanboying, huh?" He agrees that he was, and I would argue he still is. Ryan often refers to Gypsy as her full name rather than just Gypsy, and not because he's aware his wife's name is a literal slur for a group of people. Married people typically don't refer to their husband or wife this way. Almost it's like he wants the world to remember who she is, always, so he's associated with the Gypsy Rose Blanchard from the Hulu document drama series, rather than Gypsy the person. Given her lack of real-world skills and experience, her husband assumes a paternal role, which may initially suit Gypsy, but seeing as she's already compared him to her mother and dubbed him as controlling, the very thing she says she's susceptible to, this could potentially lead into issues as she matures and indicates potential imbalance in their relationship. On the flip side, a red flag in any relationship is the loyalty test. Gypsy admitted to putting Ryan through tests to make sure he was completely devoted to her really stands out to me. Testing romantic partners is a common behavior of narcissists in romantic relationships, as is the fact they keep many romantic interests in their orbit all at once and pit them against one another to make them compete for affection. Ryan's openly said so many people chase Gypsy and want to be with her still, and I'm honored that she chose me, whilst expressing how he had to compete with her multiple exes at first as well. Ryan also stated that Gypsy accuses him of being controlling like her mother when he questions her communication with her exes. I personally believe this is a manipulative way to excuse not being honest about talking to one of her exes, Ken, or her other ex, something she did shortly before marrying Ryan and then lied to him about. In the Lifetime series, this clearly rattled him and made him feel insecure about the state of their relationship, and she even tried to blame it on him because he doesn't understand how she feels. This competition for affection is done to inflate narcissists' egos by making them feel desired, and ensures the person they do choose feels like they are special and better than the other potential partners, therefore decreasing the likelihood that they will leave. She frames this as a coping mechanism for her abandonment issues, but I don't know where the abandonment issues she may have come into play, since she literally got someone to take her mother's life, and she pretty obviously dumped her previous boyfriend Nick and has always had control of her relationships for the past 8 years she was in prison. Speaking of Ken though, was Gypsy lying that he left for Barbie? Next segment is Inherent Liar. To quote, "I've been raised to do what my mother taught me to do, and those things aren't very good. She taught me to lie, and I don't want to lie. I want to be a good, honest person." It's undeniable that Gypsy Rose was brought up to be manipulative and deceitful, since her only role model in life was a massively narcissistic mother with other mental health concerns. In her various public appearances during and after her incarceration, Gypsy Rose has admitted to lying to her dad and her stepmom, her sister, her lawyers, the cops, and her husband. In the Lifetime series, she claims Ken left her because, and I quote, "she wasn't a blonde bimbo." But in the Vile podcast, she claims that he was afraid of the infamy of being associated with her. This is one of many examples of a rotating storyline. And in footage from her first police interrogation, Gypsy feigned shock and despair over her mother's death. "Wait, go back. No, I don't know what happened with my mom," she told the police officers, who didn't seem to be buying her act, as she asks them to tell her what happened, saying, "I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened to my mom." She knows how to play with people's emotions because Dee Dee forced her to do it for decades. It is of course a trauma response, but no amount of therapy can completely negate that learned behavior, thus it's a red flag. And so is our next segment, Questionable Details. You couldn't catch me dead saying that Gypsy Rose deserved to go to prison for how she chose to escape her hostage situation. It's a well-known fact that Kill the captors, quite literally most people's only escape in these scenarios, and Gypsy was on the road towards being literally killed herself by her mother's Munchausen by proxy syndrome. That being said, she committed a crime. She did do the time, and now the case is closed. But some details can be looked back upon and used for future references of behavior, like the circumstances directly revolving around her mother's death while Gypsy was in another room. In her sit-down with ABC News, Gypsy said that she was terrified and hid in the bathroom when Nick came to slay Dee Dee, who was asleep. But later, she admitted she met him at the door and helped him prepare before going into another room. What's more of a red flag is what happens after. So, it's first said that Gypsy and then boyfriend Nick had intercourse on Gypsy's bed while her mama's corpse is in the next room. Red flag without anything else said and done. You really got such a rush out of that crime, it got your hoo-haws going? But then the tune changes in interviews because that sounds bad, and she alleged that Nick had taken her by force. Then it wasn't just that he had taken her by force, it was a deal for him to take her by force to prevent Nick from having intercourse with her mother's corpse, stating, "I made a deal with him, I'd let him violate me, and then he wouldn't do that to my mom, in Mommy Dead and Dearest." Next up, let's talk about the voice change. And I'm not talking about how mine does throughout a video. It's said if you watch Gypsy's OG interrogation videos, then compare them to interviews, she does what many call an intentional voice change, between an average, somewhat high-pitched voice and then one of a completely childlike demeanor. The first person to ever comment on this was actually the taxi driver who took her and Nick to Wisconsin after the crime, and he told ABC News that he picked up Gypsy wearing, and I quote, what looked like an old-looking Cher wig, and again, quote, "The girl looked 12, sounded 5, and had a 40-year-old attitude, and she was not afraid to tell me off." When questioned on her childlike demeanor, specifically her voice, Gypsy not only said it's real, but also got noticeably defensive in the BuzzFeed interview. "It's not my fault, I can't help it, this is my voice," she told the reporter Michelle Dean. Despite her claim, many have made TikToks and videos doing comparisons and highlighting times where it seems intentional. But hey, code switching could be one of the many things she learned from inmates. Our next segment, this can be a red flag depending on what it is that you learned. For example, that something that isn't one but is red in nature is how Gypsy learned about menstruation alongside pads, tampons, menstrual cups, oh my, from her fellow inmates. Before her release, Gypsy also sat down with Lifetime for their upcoming docuseries, The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, where she explained that her mama made her wear a diaper during her menstruation and made her feel like Carrie at the prom. When she got to prison, she had to learn more about her body. Her cellmates actually helped her, showed her how to use tampons. But in the same interview, Gypsy explained that she had learned much more than just tampon insertion, seeking relationship advice and social instruction from other women in prison. "In prison, I'm around women that have been around the block or two. They have a lot of life experience," she told People. "Maybe it's not the best life experience, but I've been able to gain some positives from being around other inmates. Maybe not the best for someone who says they're easily influenced, but ideally, like said, she was exposed to the right inmates. Fingers crossed." But there's some worry that Gypsy isn't taking proper accountability, our next segment, and that it could be due to the glorification she received, whether it was from other inmates or adoring letters. While the now 32-year-old was released in December, Nick Gojan was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving his sentence in the Potsdam Correctional Center in Missouri. Blanchard, meanwhile, has been taking part in a variety of interviews, recalling her experience and speaking about the death of her mother. In one recent chat with the Vile Files podcast, Blanchard revealed that despite her crime, she doesn't identify as a killer, stating that if you think about it, yes, I had a part in playing in it. I asked Nick for help, she said, but he's the one that did the actual kill, not me. I can't kill anyone. That's why he's in trouble to begin with, because he's the one that did it. So when they say I'm a killer, I don't identify as that. I think she's missing the fact that she was the mastermind and the initiator of the killing, and the person who planned everything. To quote one viewer's response, "She's literally the one that made sure Nick didn't leave no fingerprints, no evidence. Yes, she didn't do the act, but she was just as involved. And that by thinking of her crime the way she has, she isn't exactly taking accountability for it. If a juror says the jury finds the defendant guilty of killing and the defendant says, okay, but I don't identify as a killer, the judge isn't gonna say, damn, okay, case dismissed, all charges dropped. BFFR, that's a red flag." Journalist impressions are up next because people hear these things come out of her mouth live and in person, but they also meet her off camera and get an idea of her energy and behavior. And some journalists have been honest in believing she's a stray. Dean, the investigative journalist who covered the story for BuzzFeed, isn't quite convinced about her. He said, "I do think Gypsy is potentially dangerous. Dee Dee was a master manipulator. It's impossible that Gypsy would not have picked this up and used it." Which is something she did admit to herself. But in the HBO documentary, we hear from a Munchausen expert who said he believes that Gypsy is afflicted with some degree of sociopathy, pointing to some of her behavior after the killing of her mother as a source. While the filmmaker Aaron Lee Carr acknowledged seeing a shift in Gypsy's behavior depending on how she was speaking, she ultimately does still believe her. Glorifying Gypsy is our next segment, and it's an important one. In the days and weeks leading up to her release, a lot of weird comments were made. TikTok edits, people publicly begging her to make vlogs when she's out, or promising to help catch her up on meme culture. It was weird, infantilizing, and it's still going on. This is one of the biggest red flags surrounding Gypsy Rose, and we'll talk about her part in all of this in the next segment. But for now, we need to highlight how society has responded to her release as part of a larger problem. Gypsy Rose is not a character, nor a TikTok trend. She's not your chance to interact with a true crime video come to life. This is a person, one who started as a traumatized youth, one who deserves peace and as normal of a life as possible, not to become the toy of bored internet users, which goes to show exactly how much social media ruined empathy, as people can't see women as beyond the content they can provide. She doesn't want to live quietly. She said she wants to remain in the public eye and be a voice for victims, but people aren't letting her be in the public eye for that reason. They want a performance, they want Gypsy Rose, the character. They aren't letting her be an advocate, they're making her into a sideshow. So our last segment is about how that will affect Gypsy, and thus make a Clifford the Dog size and shade of flag. It's Performative Platform. We are for sure witnessing in real time Gypsy become the weirdest influencer on earth. Something plenty of people are disturbed by, which is why you've probably seen plenty of the "why are we treating this traumatized woman who's never had a day of freedom in her life like this, like a random TikTok star" videos. But she's also doing that to herself. Now obviously, she is a felon. She has very limited education, most of it acquired in prison, and she doesn't have many career options. So it's expected of her to monetize her story as a source of income. Also, that she'll at least declaratively state she's out spreading awareness for victims thing, which in the opinion of one Reddit user, in cases like this is just something you say to make the fact that you're earning money and sensationalizing on a morbid event more ethical. But the get ready with me's, the red carpets, the newlywed quiz game with her husband, it's in poor taste. She chose this, she loves the attention, and in that way the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as much as I hate to say it. This brings up one last problem now. Gypsy spent her entire life performing already. But what happens if people expect something of her maybe she can't do, can't keep up with, because she spent 8 years in prison missing out on her life and normal development, and this girl snaps? She isn't giving the performance you guys want, so she'll lose the performance platform. People on social media nowadays don't retain attention for long. TikTok and Instagram trends change at the drop of a hat. So what happens to Gypsy riding on all this attention, because it's not an if, it's a when, this all goes away? Do you think that's healthy for her, let alone something she'll know how to handle? That's the end of another BTS video. I sure hope you enjoy. Leave some comments down below, like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you around.